In this video, we're going to cover a time-saving mechanism in parliamentary law known as unanimous consent. This is when the chair says, if there is no objection, the chair then states what will happen if there's no objection. For example, the chair might say, if there's no objection, $50 shall be donated to the ABC Foundation. I always recommend that the chair then specifically ask, is there any objection? If there is no objection, the chair then says, since there is no objection, $50 shall be donated to the ABC Foundation. So how does a member object? Well, when the chair asks, is there any objection, or at any time when it is clear that the chair is asking for unanimous consent, a member simply calls out objection, or I object. You do not need to be recognized by the chair to object. You simply say objection or I object. You also do not need to provide a reason for objecting, and it is generally not in order to include any comments with your objection. Sometimes members use their objection as an opportunity to speak against the proposed action, but this is not in order. Such comments should properly take place in debate after the chair has formally placed the motion before the assembly and after the chair has recognized the member to speak. Now, as an alternative form, the chair may say, without objection, and then state the action that will happen if there is no objection. For example, the chair might say, without objection, $50 shall be donated to the ABC Foundation. And the chair might skip the step of actually asking, is there any objection? So a member should be ready to object if, in fact, he opposes the use of unanimous consent in this instance. He would, of course, do this by saying, objection or I object. The reason I recommend that the chair specifically ask whether there is an objection is simply to avoid confusion and to ensure that members have a clear opportunity to provide an objection. Otherwise, it is quite possible that a member will offer an objection after the chair has declared the result. And what happens in this case? Well, Robert's Rules of Order specifically addresses this and provides that if an objection is made with reasonable promptness, even though the chair may have already announced the result as one of no objection, he must disregard such an announcement and proceed to state the question in the usual manner. So we see that the chair can't hurry things along so much that members are left behind without an opportunity to object. However, notice the wording of this particular provision. If an objection is made with reasonable promptness. So if the chair provides a reasonable opportunity for members to object, and then declares the motion adopted or declares that some action shall be taken, and then the assembly moves on to other business, a member can't then say, wait a minute, I think I will object to that earlier motion. At this point, it would be too late to offer an objection. The member would have to seek another avenue to reconsider, rescind, or amend the valid decision of the assembly. So we see that with unanimous consent, the assembly is able to skip the formal steps of handling a motion, which are a member makes a motion, another member seconds the motion, the chair places the motion before the assembly, members debate the motion, the chair puts the motion to a vote, and the chair announces the result. All of this time can be saved if there's no opposition to the motion's adoption. Many routine or non-controversial motions can be handled quickly by unanimous consent. And unanimous consent can be used anywhere in the process of handling a motion. For instance, when a member makes a motion, instead of the chair placing it before the assembly as he normally would, the chair can use unanimous consent. So if a member says, I move that $100 shall be donated to the ABC Foundation, and the chair suspects there will be no opposition, the chair could say, if there's no objection, $100 shall be donated to the ABC Foundation. Is there any objection? Since there is no objection, $100 shall be donated to the ABC Foundation. In another scenario, let's say a member makes a motion. Then another member seconds the motion. Then the chair places the motion before the assembly for consideration. Then members debate the motion. Now, while members are debating the motion, if all of the debate is in favor of the motion and none of the debate is opposed, the chair might ask for unanimous consent at this point, especially if the voting method used in the assembly consumes considerable time, such as electronic keypads, which are often used in large assemblies, or online voting, which is often used in electronic meetings. In parliamentary law, we always want to use the quickest, easiest approach first. Why bother with a time-consuming formal vote if it appears that unanimous consent can be obtained quickly and simply? And keep in mind that any member has the right to object. so a call for unanimous consent never infringes upon the rights of any member, with a notable exception that is covered at the end of this video. So if you're opposed to the action that is being proposed, should you object? Well, that's certainly up to you, and your answer to that question will be different at different times and under different circumstances. Robert's Rules of Order provides that unanimous consent does not necessarily imply that every member present is in favor of the proposed action. It may only mean that the opposition, feeling that it is useless to oppose or discuss the matter, simply acquiesces. So, unanimous consent is about saving the Assembly's time. If you oppose the proposition, but you know you're not going to be able to win anyone over in debate, and you know a formal vote will result in the motion's adoption anyway, you may very well be in favor of skipping the time involved in the formal process and moving on to the next matter, where your debate might be more useful. Robert's Rules of Order adds that no member should hesitate to object if he feels it is desirable to do so, but he should not object merely for dilatory purposes. I once met a lady who proudly proclaimed that she always objects to unanimous consent. I think she was missing the point of this very helpful parliamentary tool. So that brings us to an important question. What happens if a member does object? Well, Robert's Rules of Order says, when a member responds to the chair's inquiry, "Is there any objection?" with "I object," he may not necessarily oppose the motion itself, but may believe that it is wise to take a formal vote under the circumstances. In other words, the objection is raised not to the proposed action, but to the actions being taken without a formal vote. So when a member objects, the chair simply follows or returns to the formal process for handling the motion. Now let's look at a few examples of where unanimous consent is commonly used. It is commonly used for corrective amendments. For example, let's say a motion was made that $5,000 shall be donated to the XYZ Foundation. And let's say during debate on this motion, a member points out that the actual name of the foundation is the XYZ National Foundation. Then, instead of following the formal process for amending the motion, the chair would most likely use unanimous consent by saying, if there is no objection, national shall be inserted after XYZ. Another great place to use unanimous consent is with simple, non-controversial amendments. For example, let's use the same motion, and we'll say that someone speaking in debate makes a motion to amend by adding "from the charity fund." And let's say this amendment is seconded. Instead of placing it before the Assembly for debate, the chair might first ask for unanimous consent to add the words. If there is no objection, the words are added and debate continues on the main motion. If there is an objection, the chair places the amendment before the Assembly for consideration, and members can then debate the amendment before it is put to a vote. Another common example where unanimous consent is used is recess, where the chair might say, "It is now 12:15, and the chair has been informed that the food is ready in the dining hall. If there is no objection, the meeting will recess until 1:30 p.m. There are generally no objections when lunch is involved. That has been my experience anyway. Another common use of unanimous consent is when adopting an agenda. If the Assembly uses an agenda, the chair might say, "The agenda has been distributed. If there is no objection, the agenda shall be adopted." This highlights just a few instances where unanimous consent is used quite commonly. But of course, there is no limit to where it might be used to save the Assembly a little time. Now, there's one more aspect of unanimous consent that I'd like to cover. Let's take a look at a provision from Robert's Rules of Order, which provides that if a member is uncertain of the effect of an action proposed for unanimous consent, he can call out, "I reserve the right to object," or "reserving the right to object." After brief consultation, he can then object or withdraw his reservation. Many parliamentarians might be wondering about the application of this rule. This is something that I've never seen formally applied in a meeting by a member actually saying, "I reserve the right to object." And I've certainly never seen a member withdraw such a reservation. But this principle is often applied in meetings in various informal versions. For example, when the chair asks whether there is any objection to donating $100 to the ABC Foundation, a member might say, "Mr. President, is this the same amount we donated last year?" And when the president responds that, in fact, it is the same amount as last year, the member might say, "I have no objection." But on the other hand, if the chair responds that the proposed donation is double the amount donated last year, the member might say, "Well then, I object." As another common example, a member might say, "Madam Chairman, I don't have an objection necessarily, but I'm unclear on which account this would be coming from." In both of these examples, we see that the members needed more information to determine whether or not they wanted to object, and certainly they have a right to get this clarification without having to object first, and without losing their right to object. So, if you're a presiding officer, look for opportunities to apply this time-saving mechanism of unanimous consent. And if you're a member, be clear on the fact that you have a right to object. But in many cases, I suspect you'll be happy to skip the formal process of handling a motion when it is clear that the Assembly has no objection. Now, earlier in this video, I mentioned a notable instance where unanimous consent cannot be used. That is when a ballot vote is involved. A ballot vote allows members to keep their votes secret. Robert's Rules of Order provides that when a vote is to be taken or has been taken by ballot, whether or not the bylaws require that form of voting, no action is in order that would force the disclosure of a member's vote or views on the matter. So we see that in those cases where a ballot vote is used, a member has a right to keep his vote a secret, and he would not be able to object to unanimous consent without revealing his opposition to the motion. This is why unanimous consent cannot be used with a ballot vote. That covers unanimous consent.